Okay, and we can begin. Welcome anyone who's joining in right now. I'm. Oh wait. Oh, hang on. I forgot to get the mic set up. 1 second. That's not good. 1 sec. You may not hear me properly. Rather, the audio might be really garbage. 1 second. Let me fix that real quick. Okay, now the mic should be much better. That's good. Cool. Hope you don't mind me messing it up a little bit. Audio at first was a little lackluster, but hey, we got it fixed in the end, didn't we? All right. Welcome. Oh, here's that one. welcome, everyone, to another eventful stream, you can say, I guess. So. We have an interesting topic today. Don't know how much it's what you expect it to be or what have you, but it will be certainly an interesting one nonetheless. I have a few ideas planned for some fun activities, one might say, a discussion, and more than a little bit of audience participation. Now, I do want to bring up a few things first. We did unfortunately just lose a bunch of people actually today, more than one, I would say. There's been a couple people we lost today actually. It's kind of horrible. For one, we of course started the day off by losing Ken Page, who is the actor who played Oogie Boogie in the Nightmare Before Christmas and Every Single Possible Thing. Gas station candy. Thank you for the super chat. This topic was made in a factory just for me. Well, hopefully we are able to live up to expectations. And I know, yeah, we unfortunately also lost John Amos, who I know most from. Honestly, I think I know him most from when I first saw him was, it's the dad from Coming to America, who owned McDonald's or whatever it is. Yeah, no, it's heartbreaking. A lot of really iconic actors are passing away one by one. We lost Chris Christopherson before. We lost Maggie Smith. We lost a lot of people. It's just a reminder that life is fleeting, and the value every day you have with everyone you love and care about. But that being said, today is not a day for mourning. At least not for us in this stream anyway. It's a day of discussion, of analysis, of determining a few silly little questions. McDowell's, there we go, McDowell's. That's the name of it. It's a day where we talk about the history and trajectory of horror. When the spooky month comes around, a few things I always think of a few things. What scary movies to watch? What terrifying things to jump into? What nightmares to unleash upon this world and bask in the glory of? And today we're going to be doing just that. We're going to be talking about fear as a history, as a legacy, and how the components of analog horror, of creepypastas, they are reflective of a much older tradition that many people may not be familiar with. The tradition of blurring the line between reality and fiction for the sake of terrifying, for the sake of fear. I'm going to be doing just that. Delving into what the differences are between the horror icons birthed online and the horror icons birthed for the silver screen or the page. We're going to be talking about some interesting experiments over the course of cinema history where people tried to blur the line between storytelling even further. May sound a little fun. Mayhaps. But I want you to walk, and come the end of this stream, I have a little bit of a fun little experiment for you as well. It may be a bad idea, but time for some audience participation, I think. At least the attempt of it therein, I suppose. So, There we go. Cool, cool, cool. Yes. Cool. Now, from here... I see. Okay, well, that's going to be fun. Okay, maybe that won't work out too well. Sorry, I was trying something interesting that might be fun, but it doesn't look like it's going to be working out too well. But that's okay. That's all right. We'll figure it out as we go. So, let's take a step back a second. So, when you think of internet horror chat, what are some things that you personally think of? Oh, do you see something moving in my screen? Is something moving? I don't know why it's moving. It's a still image. Just a JPEG. Chat, if you think you're seeing something moving in this screen, you're not thinking straight. This is a wallpaper without any movement on it. It's not a GIF. It's just a JPEG. Chat, you're so silly sometimes. Now, here's something first and foremost. The idea of a story blurring the line between reality and fiction is not a new thing. Campfires have always told stories that were ultimately just tales passed down from person to person, repeated, much like the creepypastas of old. Because creepypastas back in the day, of course, were stories, or pastas were, copypasta was just pieces of text you'd copy and share with your friends, or on forums. But, no, there's no movement on this picture. This is still picture. Chat, why do you keep saying it's moving? That's strange of you all. I'm very concerned that you think the still image is moving. It's clearly not. Unless something going on with your screen right now. Do you feel like it's watching you? Do you feel like it's looking at you? Maybe something is going on. Now, yes. Now, a lot of people will point to the beginning of this whole boom with creepypastas and analog horror to a certain film. I'm going to put something in the way of this wallpaper. You guys clearly can't handle this still wallpaper going on. A lot of people will cite a little film called The Blair Witch Project. Let me move the screen over a little bit so it's a little more clear in frame. There you go. A lot of people cite The Blair Witch Project as the beginning of all of these analog horror pieces. But The Blair Witch Project itself was just drawing from older pieces of cinema. A great example of that would be a little film called The Last Broadcast. Now, what you don't know about is The Last Broadcast was an analog horror film set in the Garden State itself, good old New Jersey. The Last Broadcast was a horror film that was focused on a documentary crew that went into the Pine Barrens in search for the Jersey Devil. I see some people in chat mentioning two other films, which is where I'm going to mention next. Of course, people who have a little bit more trajectory into the past may also point out the McPherson tapes. In part because, quite frankly, people didn't even know this was a movie for the longest time. They thought it was a real piece of cinema. The McPherson tape is a pseudo found footage movie, quite literally found footage, of a family who's abducted by aliens, or at least their home is besieged by aliens. Now, what's so interesting about the McPherson tape is that the movie itself was for many years believed to be authentic alien abduction footage. In fact, it was passed around. All copies of this film were actually lost for some time. A big fire burned down a warehouse. The director thought it was a lost film, but apparently a copy or two survived. And one copy that was passed around a lot was passed around in UFO conventions. The opening credits and closing credits were cut off, so it looked like it was just an authentic tape. And in fact, I'd actually seen footage of the McPherson tape back when I was in middle school looking up aliens and stuff like that. I found someone sharing bits of it online. At this time, it was not super well known that it was a movie. People thought it was genuinely real, but I have to question your ability to believe. Even as a kid, I knew it was nonsense back then. Of course, the one that everyone always talks about as being the first real found footage film is, of course, a movie that I feel a little worried to show on screen for anything of, Cannibal Holocaust. One of the iconic video nasties, but because this film is highly controversial, I'm not going to be discussing that film on this stream. I would like to be monetized. But those are a couple films that are iconic in terms of the found footage method. But what if I told you that the history of quote-unquote blurring the line between reality and fiction and storytelling dates far, far, far older? In fact, it predates film itself. Now, I have here a story written by a little-known writer. You probably never heard him before. Edgar Allan Poe. Nick Wolf, thank you for the super chat. Going off Friday's cozy horror video for tonight, I recommend Angel Hair, an analog horror series that oscillates between warm fuzzies and sharp scratches. Hey, I'm recommending that to you all as well. Watch Angel Hair. Now, many people know about Edgar Allan Poe, of course. You know about, The Raven, Fall of the House of Usher, Mask of the Red Death, Pit and the Pendulum, The Gold Bug, maybe, Cast of Amontillado. Amontillado? But there's the Purloined Letter, perhaps. But there is a certain story, right here, of course. I got the page out for you. One that is interesting in how it was published. Now, you see, most of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, they were published in... Let me set the tone right for this. I don't think this is the right music to play. Let me play a little bit of a different ambient noise. Let me get this up real quick. I got this. I got you. Let me see this right here. That's much better. That's much better. Let me raise it up in chat here. Now, chat, let me preface this by saying I'm going to allow you to read along with this as well. Chat, I'm about to read you a story as we wait for more people to file in. This is one of the first pieces of found footage, I guess you can say, of analog storytelling possible. Edgar Allan Poe wrote the facts in the case of Monsieur Valdemar back in a scientific journal. This was published with the intent of being interpreted as scientific. And since it's in the public domain, I can read it to you in its entirety right now. So, now I'm not duping. The facts in the case of Monsieur Valdemar. And now I'm going to tell you the story in its entirety. This is Creepypasta before Creepypasta. And again, this was published anonymously, or at least through a pen name, in a scientific journal. They knew it was Poe, but it was a big prank, a big joke. But people at the time did not realize it was. So as my very stationary wallpaper stays very stationary, allow me to read to you a little story. Of course, I shall not pretend to consider it any matter for wonder that the extraordinary case of Monsieur Valdemar had excited discussion. It would have been a miracle had it not, especially under the circumstances. Through the desire of all parties concerned to keep the affair from the public, at least for the present, or until we had further opportunities for investigation. Though our endeavors to effect this, a garbled or exaggerated account made its way into society and became the source of many unpleasant misrepresentations, and very naturally, of a great deal of disbelief. It is now rendered necessary that I give the facts, as far as I comprehend them myself. They are, succinctly, this. My attention for the last 3 years has been repeatedly drawn to the subject of mesmerism, and about 9 months ago, it occurred to me quite suddenly that in the series of experiments made hitherto, there had been a very remarkable and most unaccountable omission. No person had as yet been mesmerized in articulo mortis, otherwise known as in the early clutches of death. It remained to be seen first whether in such a condition there existed in the patient any susceptibility to the magnetic influence. Secondly, whether, if any existed, it was impaired or increased by the condition. And thirdly, to what extent or for how long a period the encroachments of death might be arrested by the process. There were other points to be ascertained, but these most excited my curiosity, the last in especial, from the immensely important character of its consequence. Wish for me to keep reading, chat? I will if you ask. Or would you rather me jump to a different creepypasta? For you see, my intent here is to analyze how the art of storytelling with horror has changed from the 1800s to 2020. Ah, yes, I'm seeing some responses already for a yes. Anyone else wish to me continue the story of Monsieur Valdemar? Very well. We continue. In looking around me for some subject by whose means I might test these particulars, it was brought to think of my friend, Monsieur Ernest Valdemar, the well-known compiler of the Bibliotheca Forensica, an author under the nom de plume of Ishtar Marx, of the Polish versions of Wallenstein and Gargantua. Monsieur Valdemar, who had resided principally in Harlem, New York since the year of 1839, is, or was, particularly noticeable for the extreme spareness of his person. His lower limbs were resembling those of John Rudolph, and also for the whiteness of his whiskers, in violent contrast to the blackness of his hair. And the latter, in consequence, being very generally mistaken for a wig. His temperament was markedly nervous, and rendered him a good subject for mesmeric experiment. On 2 or 3 occasions I had put him to sleep with little difficulty, but was disappointed in other results, which his peculiar constitution had naturally led me to anticipate. His will was at no period positively or thoroughly under my control, and in regards to clairvoyance, I could accomplish with him nothing to be relied upon. I always attributed my failure at these points to be the disordered state of his health. For some months previous to my becoming acquainted with him, his physicians had declared him in a confirmed phthisis. It was his custom, indeed, to speak calmly of his approaching disillusion, as a matter of neither to be avoided nor regretted. When the ideas to which I have alluded first occurred to me, it was of course very natural that I would think of Valdemar. I knew the steady philosophy of the man too well to apprehend any scruples from him, and he had no relatives in America who would be likely to interfere. I spoke to him frankly upon the subject, and to my surprise, his interest seemed vividly excited. I say to my surprise, for although he had always yielded his person freely to my experiments, he had never before given me any tokens of sympathy with what I did. His disease was of that character which would admit of exact calculation in respect to the epoch of his termination in death. And it was finally arranged between us that he would send for me about 24 hours before his period announced before the period announced by his physicians as that of his decease. It is now rather more than 7 months since I received from Valdemar himself the subjoined note. My dear, you may come now. The doctors have agreed I cannot hold out beyond tomorrow midnight, and they have hit that time very nearly. It's a very short story, don't worry. Actually, it's not that short. This may take a little while. I received this note within half an hour after it was written, and in 15 minutes more, I was in the dying man's chamber. I had not seen him for 10 days and was appalled by the fearful alteration with which the brief interval had wrought in him. His face wore a leaden hue, the eyes were utterly lustrous, and the emaciation was so extreme that the skin had been broken through by the cheekbones. His expectoration was excessive. The pulse was barely perceptible. He retained, nevertheless, in a very remarkable manner, both his mental power and a certain degree of physical strength. He spoke with distinctness, took some palliative medicines without aid, and when I entered, the same room was occupied by penciling memoranda in a pocketbook. He was propped up by a pillow. Doctors were in attendance. Now, I can tell you're probably bored of my storytelling, so I can save you the rest for later. But rest assured, when this story was published and its ending reached, the audience at the time were quite frightened. I want you all to keep that in mind as we keep going. Because the nature of the beginning was... Oh. Chat, you wish for me to continue? I'm going to ask chat right now. Should I finish? Oh, it looks like people want me to finish. Chat, let me know. Do you want me to finish the story? Oh, wow. 100%. Okay. Sounds like I should continue then. I'll keep going then. You all want me to? After pressing Valdemar's hand, I took these gentlemen aside and obtained from them a minute account of the patient's condition. The left lung had been for 18 months in a semi-osseous or cartilaginous state, and was of course entirely useless for all purposes of vitality. The right in its upper portion was also partially, if not thoroughly, ossified, while the lower region was merely a mass of purulent tuberculosis. Tubercles running into one another. Several extensive perforations existed, and at one point permanent adhesion to the ribs had taken place. These appearances in the right lobe were of comparatively recent date. More details about the grotesque nature of his body aside, let's push ahead. It was of the opinion of both physicians that Valdemar would die about midnight on the morrow, Sunday. It was 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. On quitting the invalid's bedside, to hold conversation with myself, the doctors had bidden him a final farewell. It had not been to their intention to return, but by my request, they agreed to look in upon the patient at 10 the next night. When they had gone, I spoke freely with Valdemar on the subject of his approaching disillusion, as well as particularly of the experiment proposed. He still professed himself quite willing and even anxious to have it made, and urged me to commence it at once. A male and female nurse were in attendance, but did not feel myself altogether at liberty to engage in the task of this character with no more reliable witnesses than these people, in case of a sudden accident, might prove. I therefore postponed operations until about 8 the next night, with the arrival of a medical student with whom I had some acquaintance. He relieved me from further embarrassment. It had been my design originally to wait for the physicians, but I was induced to proceed first by the urgent entreaties of Valdemar, and secondly, by my conviction that I had not a moment to lose. And secondly, as he was evidently sinking fast. The acquaintance was so kind as to accede to my desire that he would take notes of all that occurred, and it is from his memoranda that what I now have to relate is, for the most part, either condensed or copied verbatim. Again, blurring the line between reality and fiction. That's Poe's method to his madness here. It wanted about 5 minutes of 8 when, taking the patient's hand, I begged him to state, as distinctly as he could, whether Valdemar, was entirely willing that I should make the experiment of mesmerizing him in his then condition. He replied feebly, yet quite audibly, "Yes, I wish to be mesmerized," adding immediately afterwards, "I fear you have deferred it too long." While he spoke thus, I commenced the passes which I had already found most effective in subduing him. He was evidently influenced with the first lateral stroke of my hand across his forehead, but although I exerted all my powers, no further perceptible effect was induced until some time after 10 o'clock, when the doctors called, according to appointment. I explained to them, in a few words, what I had designed, as they opposed no objection, saying that the patient was already in death's agony. I proceeded without hesitation, exchanging, however, the lateral passes for downward ones, and directed my gaze entirely into the right eye of the sufferer. By this time, his pulse was imperceptible, and his breathing stertorous, and at intervals of half a minute. This condition was nearly unaltered for a quarter of an hour. At the expiration of this period, however, a natural, though very deep sigh escaped from the bosom of the dying man, and the stertorous breathing ceased. That is to say, it was no longer apparent. The intervals were undiminished. The patient's extremities were of an icy coldness. At 5 minutes before 11, I perceived unequivocal signs of the mesmeric influence. The glassy roll of the eye was exchanged for that of an expression of uneasy inward examination, which is never seen except in the cases of sleepwalking, which is right impossible to mistake. With a few skipping ahead a little bit, I was not satisfied, however, with this, but I continued to manipulate the manipulation vigorously, and with the fullest exertion of the will, until I had completely stiffened the limbs of the slumberer after placing him in so seemingly easy position. The legs were at full length, the arms were nearly so, and reposed on the bed at a moderate distance from the loins. The head was slightly elevated. When I had accomplished this, it was fully midnight, and I requested the gentlemen present to examine Valdemar's condition. After a few experiments, they admitted him to be in an unusually perfect state of mesmeric trance. The curiosity of both the physicians was greatly excited. One doctor resolved at once to remain with the patient all night, while the other took leave with a promise to return at daybreak. My associate and the nurses remained. We left Valdemar entirely undisturbed, until about 3 o'clock in the morning, when I approached him and found him in precisely the same condition as when the doctors went away. That is to say, he lay in the same position, his pulse was imperceptible, the breathing was gentle, the eyes were closed naturally, and the limbs were as rigid and as cold as marble. Still, the general appearance was certainly not of death. As I approached Valdemar, I made a kind of half-effort to influence his right arm into pursuit of my own, as I passed the latter gently to and fro above his person. In short, such experiments with this patient I had never perfectly succeeded before, and assuredly I had little thought of succeeding now. But to my astonishment, his arm was very readily, although feebly, followed in every direction I assigned it, with mine. I determined to hazard a few words of conversation. And here's the part of the story where if you think this is real, fear is about to settle in. Valdemar, I said, are you asleep? He made no answer, but I perceived a tremor about the lips, and was thus induced to repeat the question, again and again. At its third repetition, his whole frame was agitated by very slight shivering. The eyelids unclosed themselves so far as to display a white line of a ball. The lips moved sluggishly, and from between them, in a barely audible whisper, issued the words, "Yes, asleep now. Do not wake me. Let me die so." I here felt the limbs, and found them as rigid as ever. The right arm, as before, obeyed the direction of my hand. I questioned the sleepwalker again. "Do you still feel pain in the breast, Valdemar?" The answer now was immediate, but even less audible than before. "No pain. I am dying." I did not think it advisable to disturb him any further just then, and nothing more was said or done until the arrival of the doctor, who came a little before sunrise, and expressed unbound astonishment at finding the patient still alive. After feeling the pulse and applying a mirror to his lips, he requested me to speak to the sleepwalker again. I did so, saying, "Valdemar, do you still sleep?" As before, some minutes elapsed ere a reply was made, and during the interval, the dying man seemed to be collecting his energies to speak. At my fourth repetition of the question, he said faintly, although almost inaudibly, "Yes, still asleep, dying." It was now the opinion, or rather the wish, of the physicians that Valdemar should be suffered to remain undisturbed in his present apparently tranquil condition until death should supervene. And this, it was generally agreed, must now take place within a few minutes. I concluded, however, to speak with him once more, and merely repeated my question. Alright, sorry about that. A little bit of an issue here. One sec. Very good, though. Sorry about the interruption there. Where was I? When I spoke, there came a marked change over the countenance of the sleepwaker. The eyes rolled themselves slowly open, the pupils disappearing upwardly. The skin generally assumed a cadaverous hue, resembling not so much parchment as white paper, and the circular hectic spots, which hitherto had been strongly defined in the center of each cheek, went out at once. I use this expression because the suddenness of their departure put me in a mind of nothing so much as the distinguishment of a candle by a puff of the breath. The upper lip at the same time writhed itself away from the teeth, which it had previously covered completely. But the left jaw fell with an audible jerk, leaving the mouth widely extended and disclosing in full view the swollen and blackened tongue. I presume that no member of the party then present had been unaccustomed to deathbed horrors, but so hideously. Sorry. Issue with the computer again. My mistake there. So hideous beyond conception was the appearance of Valdemar at this moment, that there was a general shrinking back from the region of the bed. I now feel that I've reached a point of the narrative at which every reader will be startled into positive disbelief. It is my business, however, simply to proceed. There was no longer the fainting sign of vitality in Valdemar, and in concluding him to be dead, we were consigning him to the charge of the nurses, when a strong vibratory motion was observable in the tongue. This continued for perhaps a minute, wagging of the tongue up and down. At the expiration of this period, there issued from the distended and motionless jaws a voice, such as it would be madness in me to attempt describing. There are indeed 2 or 3 epithets which might be considered as applicable in the part. I might say, for example, the sound was harsh and broken and hollow, but the hideousness whole is indescribable, for the simple reason that no similar sounds had ever jarred upon the ear of humanity. There were 2 particulars, nevertheless, that I thought then, and still think, might fairly be stated as characteristic of the intonation, as well as adapted to convey some idea of the unearthly peculiarity. In the first place, the voice seemed to reach our ears, or at least mine, from some vast distance, or from some deep cavern within the earth. In the second place, it impressed me, I fear indeed that it will be impossible to make myself comprehended, as a gelatinous or glutinous manners impress the sense of touch. I have spoken both of sound and voice. I mean to say that the sound was of one even wonderfully thrilling distinct solemnification. Valdemar spoke, obviously in reply to the question I propounded to him a few minutes before. I had asked him, it will be remembered, if he still slept. He now said, "Yes. No. I have been sleeping, and now I am dead." No person present even affected to deny or attempt to repress the unutterable, shuddering horror which these few words thus uttered were so calculated to convey. The students swooned, and the nurses immediately left the chamber, and could not be induced to return. My own impressions I would not pretend to render intelligible to the reader. For nearly an hour we busied ourselves, silently, without the utterance of a word, in endeavors to revive the student. When he came to himself, we addressed ourselves again in an investigation of Valdemar's condition. It remained in all aspects, as I had last described it, at the exception that the mirror no longer afforded the evidence of respiration. An attempt to draw blood from the arm fails. I should mention, too, that this limb was no longer subject to my will. I endeavored in vain to make it follow the direction of my hand. The only real indication, indeed, of the mesmeric influence was now found in the vibratory movement of the tongue. Whenever I addressed Valdemar a question, he seemed to be making an effort to reply, but had no longer sufficient volition. To queries put to him by any other person than myself, he seemed utterly insensible, although I endeavored to place each member of the company in mesmeric rapport with him. I believe that I have now related all that is necessary to an understanding of the sleepwaker's state at this epoch. Other nurses were preoccupied, and at 10 o'clock I left the house in the company of the 2 physicians and the student. In the afternoon we called again to see the patient. His condition remained precisely the same. We had now some discussions as to the propriety and feasibility of awakening him. But we had little difficulty in agreeing that no good purpose should be served by doing. It was evident that so far death, or what is termed death, had been arrested by the mesmeric process. It seemed clear to us all that to awaken Valdemar would be merely to ensure his instant, or at least his speedy, dissolution. From this period until the close of last week, an interval of nearly 7 months, we continued to make daily calls at Valdemar's house, accompanied now and then by medical and other friends. All this time, The sleepwaker remained exactly as I have last described him. The nurse's attentions were continual. It was Friday last that we finally resolved to make the experiment of awakening, or attempting to awaken him. And it is the perhaps unfortunate result of this latter experiment which has given rise to so much discussion in private circles, to so much of what I cannot help thinking, unwarranted popular feeling. For the purpose of relieving Valdemar from the mesmeric trance, I made the use of customary passes. These for a time were unsuccessful. The first indication of revival was afforded by a partial descent of the iris. It was observed as especially remarkable that this lowering of the pupil was accompanied by the profuse outflowing of yellowish ichor from beneath the lids, of a pungent and highly offensive odor. Rotting tears, one might say. It was now suggested that I should attempt to influence the patient's arm as heretofore. I made an attempt and failed. The one doctor then intimidated a desire to have him put a question. I did so, as follows. Valdemar, can you explain to us what your feelings or wishes now? What are your feelings or wishes now? There was an instant return of the hectic circles on the cheeks. The tongue quivered, or rather rolled, violently in the mouth, although the jaw and lips remained as rigid as ever. And at length, the same hideous voice which I have described broke forth. For God's sake, quick, quick, put me to sleep, or quick, waken me, quick. I say to you that I am dead. I was so thoroughly unnerved, and for an instant remained undecided what to do. At first I made an endeavor to recompose the patient, but failing in this through total abeyance of the will, I retraced my steps, and as earnestly struggled to awaken him. In this attempt I soon saw that I would be successful. Or at least, I soon fancied my success would be complete, and I am sure that all in the room were prepared to see the patient awaken. For what really occurred, however, it is quite impossible that any human being could have been prepared. As I rapidly made the mesmeric passage, amid ejaculations of "dead, dead," absolutely bursting from the tongue and not from the lips of the sufferer, his whole frame at once, within the space of a single minute or less, shrunk, crumbled, absolutely rotted away beneath my hands. Upon the bed, before the whole company, there lay a nearly liquid mass of loathsome or detestable putrescence. Now imagine being in 19th century America and hearing that in your medical textbooks. And a man on his deathbed was hypnotized at the state of near death, kept alive for 7 months despite supposedly dying 7 months ago, only to one day be awakened from the trance and immediately rot under the fingertips of the doctors attending him. Good story, right? I'll turn off the rain effects. Oh, I guess it's still going. Yeah. So, for the time it was written in, that was believed to be a true story. People really believed it was a real account, because it was published in a pretty reputable source. Of course, it was all just a prank by Edgar Allan Poe. But people believed it. People also point to the story of the War of the Worlds, an account written by, a version of the story as read by Orson Welles. So, That's a thing right there, isn't it? What's the difference then between what I just told you and a certain creepypasta that gained quite a degree of notoriety on the internet back in the mid-2010s called the Russian Sleep Experiment? Is there any difference between the case of Valdemar and the Russian Sleep Experiment? For those who don't know the story of the Russian Sleep Experiment, it was said that there was an experiment conducted in the Soviet Union decades prior where they took several patients and locked them in a chamber, injecting into them a drug that kept them from sleeping. The story continues to focus on them, examining their trajectory and development over the course of this next several weeks as they are denied sleep and slowly lose their minds in the process. The brains rotting, their actions becoming malignant, the mental states deteriorating. Tell me if there's a difference then between the Russian sleep experiment and the case of Valdemar. Classic Luigi fan, thank you for the super chat. The magazine that published the story. It's just a prank, Poe. Yes, exactly. The only difference between the Russian sleep experiment and the case of Valdemar is, well, there's two big differences. One, that this one story involved one person, the others involved many. And two, that the Russian sleep experiment was designed more to shock with the violence of the narrative, whereas with the case of Valdemar, the psychology and the bizarreness of the narrative was enough for Poe's audience. And of course, one was set in Russia, one was set in Harlem, New York. So, very different. But both dealt with pseudoscience that the audience did not really understand. Because let's be honest, people at the time didn't believe hypnosis could solve anything. That mesmeric influence could change a person's entire physiology. Just like people might believe that you can actually stave off sleeping with a chemical drug. You know, which you can't. Not for long anyway, before you actually just die. You just perspire. But yeah, there is a method to the narrative structure of these stories. It's a story that, hey, this could have been real. You can't say immediately it didn't happen, unless you did a little bit of homework. Of course, now we know that Valdemar is a work of fiction. It's published in every Poe anthology that ever be published. But the Russian Sleep Experiment, if you saw someone post that online as a copypasta, you might actually believe it was a real account, or maybe an exaggeration of one. You are not immune to the same tricks pulled 150 years before your birth. In fact, all you are susceptible to are falling from the second time. How many times do you see a story that says based on a true story and you believe it, but until you look it up and realize, oh, it's not the case? The reality simply is that these are all fascinating cases of examining human behavior and horror. That's one account. That's one style. The idea of blurring the lines between reality and fiction is simply just one component of it. Classic Luigi fan, thank you for the super chat again. I think another factor that differentiates the two is that the Russian sleep experiment had a grittier, pulpy element. That is also very true. This story tried to be an account of history. It tried to be scientifically logical. I did skip around a few sections because it was going into the scientific notation of the effect, trying to demonstrate how such things were made possible. But the Russian sleep experiment was more focused on the gore and violence of it all. Again, because that's what people respond to. The visceral intensity of it all. I find it very funny then that creepypastas and the analog horror thing that we're going through right now both had very different styles, very different structures. The emphasis with horror with a creepypasta being the intense violence sometimes, whereas with analog horror, the focus is more on using familiar iconography and the limitations of technology to tell a story in a more compelling, effective way. I'm seeing people mention in the comments, specifically B. Parker mentioned, Fire in the Sky. Yep. Fire in the Sky, a famous hoax. Y'all ever see Fire in the Sky? Has one of the scariest alien abduction scenes I've ever seen in any movie ever. The movie itself is whatever, but that alien abduction sequence, man, is truly something. I actually am afraid of even bringing up a photo of it because I feel like YouTube, if they saw that, would demonetize this video immediately. But let's give it a shot. Here we go. Here's an image from the movie. This is your nightmares for the rest of the night. Pretty terrifying, right? Fire in the Sky. What a movie that is. A lot of alien abduction stories, though, you see online. Yeah, the sequence of Fire in the Sky where you have the aliens come down and you take the guy and they, at the end of the movie, they show what happens. It's so horrifying. It's so deeply disturbing. Easily one of the scariest alien abduction scenes ever. The movie itself is not that great. I don't like the movie itself. I like that scene. That scene's incredible, but it's the scene that makes the movie, not the other way around. Did I watch Nope? Yes, of course I watched Nope. What are you talking about? Of course I did. But one thing I want to talk about, too, that I think is very interesting, is the cycle of horror icons. Every single horror cycle that exists in media has certain conventions. Certain villains who take popularity. I want to discuss similarities between what I perceive to be 3 different cycles of horror characters. Not the only 3, but 3 cycles. The classic Gothic era, the 80s extreme era, which includes some of the 70s, and the modern internet era. Of course, with the modern internet era, I'm not going to mention Jigsaw or Annabelle or Art the Clown. I really want to focus on the horrors birthed by the internet, for intentions I think are important to discuss. Let's start with 3 characters I want to draw a comparison to. And they are as follows. We have... bring these guys up. We have here the Mummy. Classic little Boris Karloff-led monster. We have here one Michael Myers. Again, fairly well-known character. And finally, we have here a something you might call a tulpa, birthed by the internet itself, Slender Man. Let's take a look at these guys, shall we? I want to describe first the Mummy, the 1932 version of the Mummy specifically. Here we have... let's bring them up right here. Oh, this is perfect. We have here a figure, a man, who stares into the crust of your soul. He is a man much like any other, except he is unearthly. He exists as almost an entity in man's skin. There's a soullessness to him, a gaze upon his eyes. He may look like a person, but he just doesn't quite fit in with the rest. Of course, you may think of the Mummy as a bandaged up figure, but in 1932's The Mummy with Boris Karloff, he is, of course, Imhotep, the risen existence of some undead man from millennia prior. A classic Luigi fan, the tulpa actually does predate the Slender Man by a lot. It is a much older concept that the collective consciousness brings to life something. But let's first then talk about good old Mikey. Good old... that is way too small a picture. Here we go. Michael Myers. Why are all these pictures so small? You know what? One second. Let me get a decent photo here. Give me a big one. Give me a big one. There we go. Big old picture. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. There we go. There you go. Michael Myers. Michael Myers is, of course, the icon of Halloween. He is one of the most iconic slashers to have ever been birthed into this world. The Shape he's credited as. He's not even credited as Michael Myers in the credits. He's credited as The Shape, a figure that takes up human form, who stalks, stares, pursues, hunts, kills. Why? There's no reason. He just does. Even a shark has a reason to kill. A shark eats, a shark feeds, but Michael just pursues. He just exists, and he hunts, and he walks, and he stares. He may look like a person, but more so than the Mummy, there is a profound lack of humanity within him. He may have the face of a person, but his true nature is seen in the mask. He is soulless. He is without personhood. He is simply and purely evil collected in flesh. Now, we have a man whose face is obviously, if you look at the Mummy's face, you can see the bandages have actually rotted into his skin. The wrinkles suggest the wear and tear of the bandages, as though some have actually have almost melded with his skin. You can see the pattern is very much like the bandages he's wrapped in. That's by design. Jack Pierce's incredible makeup effects were so subtle and effective to differentiate Boris Karloff from a regular person. But Myers has a mask. And with each covering, the face becomes less human. Until we reach our good old friend, Slendy. The Slender Man is a towering figure. Now, as I'm seeing in comments, if you look into Michael's eyes, you will see no humanity. If you look into the Mummy's eyes, you will see the depths of humanity removed from modern life. If you look into the Slender Man's face, you will see no eyes at all. He is not a person. He is the approximation of a person, and a poor one at that. He's too tall. His limbs are disproportionate. He wears a suit in environments that seem in areas that seem unnatural. You don't see people wearing suits in the woods. It's almost like a person trying to copy being a person to further hide the true unfathomable nature. And much like Myers, his motivations are impossible to understand. The Mummy, we know what he wants. We know what he's about. He wants to bring his lost love back to life. It's a very human desire, but told through a person who's removed from humanity by simple time and age. This is not a person. He's not even in a person's shape like Myers is. He exists, but he isn't real. By no means. Now, let's take a few other things into account here, shall we? I'll leave these pictures aside for reference later. I'm going to bring up three more classic monsters. One of them, of course, did have a remake fairly recently. The Invisible Man. This next one might surprise you. I'm going to compare the Invisible Man. But it's Freddy Krueger. Finally, for our Creepypasta character, we're going to bring in Jeff the Killer. What these three have in common? Well, let's discuss. So, let's start with the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man... that's all I'm talking about. Go away. The Invisible Man, he is a person who's experimented with himself, and the pigmentation of his skin has become transparent. He is intangible. He cannot be seen. He can be felt. You can hear his breath on the wind, but he does not physically exist in your eyes. He sneaks around unseen and almost seems to not exist in relation to everything else. He occupies space, but nothing else. He is in complete control of his facilities, but he is also mad, either by the formula used to make himself invisible or by the power granted to him by his invisibility. The original Invisible Man is Jack Griffin, who is not the Invisible Man in most of the movies of the series. In fact, he's only in the first film, The Invisible Man. But this character became the inspiration for every other invisible person in history. Even Invisible Girl, Invisible Woman from Marvel Comics, Sue Storm. But The Invisible Man is not where it ends. Because if we go to the place of a man physically changing himself and being granted immeasurable power with. By the way, Invisible Man of the classic Universal cycle has the highest body count of any of the classic monsters. You see, Dracula, he kills a couple people. He kills maybe 4 people on screen. The Wolfman, he kills maybe a dozen across his movies. Frankenstein, same thing. The Mummy, even less, really. But the Invisible Man, in one movie, kills over 100 people that we know of. In one film. In the 30s. High body count here. Then we have Freddy. There's a good photo of Freddy here. I love you, Freddy. Let's get you up here. All right. Freddy Krueger. Good old Fred Krueger. He is a monster if there ever was one. Freddy Krueger, his whole thing is that he was a child murderer who was murdered by the parents of the children he killed. He was killed. He was slain. But in the process of being burned alive, he became an entity far worse than anything you could possibly ever imagine. Freddy is just as twisted physically as the Invisible Man. Rather than becoming invisible, he's become a ghost. His skin, over 90% of his body, is scorched and torched and burned. He still adorns himself with a fashionable sweater and fedora, and even has some glove wear, too. Much like how the Invisible Man has a very distinct style to him. Now, what makes Krueger so interesting is the same way with the Invisible Man. High body count. Not as high as Jason or Michael, but he is exceptionally cruel, driven mad by his own power in many ways, and his own desire to kill and torture and torment and psychologically break. He is evil. Pure evil. But no, there's no but. He's just a great villain. Freddy Krueger's great. Freddy Krueger's one of the greatest because he kills you in your sleep. And you can't escape sleep. You can't run away from sleep. But again, let's look at the facts. Physically altered. Monstrous. Extremely powerful. Extremely dangerous. Classical Luigi fan, thank you for the super chat. A friend of mine considered Griffin to be the most unsettling of the original Universal monsters. Because unlike the others, Griffin had no sympathetic motive. He's just an asshole who gained power. 100% yes. That is the thing with Griffin, and that's the thing with Krueger. There's no tragic backstory. There's no sad motivation. He's just a monster who wants to torture. I mean, yeah, there's a backstory to Krueger, but that doesn't justify any of the things he's done. He's just evil, which I think is one of the downfalls of this more modern era of horror, and I'll discuss it in a second. Finally, we have Jeff the Killer, who in this Medium article is declared the dumbest creepypasta story, and I can't even argue with that. But let's bring Jeff up, this iconic little scary snarl you probably saw in the thumbnail of this video and clicked on it. Good old Jeff the Killer. He is, well, depending on who you ask, he has different origins. I'm sure his smile is at least partially inspired by the Joker from The Dark Knight. He has a perpetual grin carved into his face. He has no nose. His face is just deformed, probably by design. And famously, no one knows where this photo comes from. This is a photo someone probably distorted, maybe in his own private photo. People have tried to find the source of the original photo for Jeff the Killer and what it was made from, but no one quite knows what it is. All we do know is that the original story focuses on a killer who is seen sneaking in the rooms, telling you before he does something Go back to sleep. Go to sleep. Jeff the Killer is probably one of the lamest of the Creepypasta villains, especially when you look at the trajectory, right? Oh, sorry about that. That something just fell. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It's just this. This fell off. No big deal. Put it right back into my desk. So you have here. Ignore that. That was just my scripts, basically. I still have the Buy Spider-Man script up too. I have to close that out. So you got the Invisible Man, right? He's a man driven by power. He is mad by all means. And as we discussed, he's just an asshole. There's no motivation there. He did it to himself. Freddy Krueger, he's just an asshole. He's just a monster with unbelievable power. But Jeff, who arguably is the most grounded and down-to-earth version of this. He is a murderer of some kind. Every single writer gave him a sympathetic backstory. They tried to justify him, make him into an uwu soft boy who was just doing things because people justified his actions. You see, the thing is, Griffin and Krueger, they are power fantasies, but in the way where it's disturbing, in the way that they show how something that's powerful that can hurt you is horrifying. And yes, in some ways they are kind of protagonists of their story to some extent, but Jeff, people kind of didn't know how to write Jeff. They became overly sympathetic to him. They became very, shall we just put it mildly, they glorified him. The only reason why Jeff became so successful was, as people in chat are pointing out, the creepypasta community of the 2010s, where people would go and say their stories in some brilliant, clever manners and these brilliant voices and this great background music. But Jeff the Killer is kind of not very effective. As in the comments, I'm seeing Cinemageddon reviews claiming this as well. Jeff the Killer is the only fictional character he knows of where every writer after him tried their hardest to make him into a Tumblr sexy man. Yeah, entirely. 100% true. Oh, by the way, I forgot to do this to you. You're a mod now. Yep, you're a mod now. You're good. Had to upgrade you there. Anyway, so they did a lot to make him very, very, very easy to defend and very powerful. But Jeff, kind of underwhelming. Let's try something a little different, though. Because creepypastas aren't just simply monsters. They're also some beings of a unusual nature. And let's talk about some monsters for a second, shall we? We got first the creature from the Black Lagoon. Then we have from the 80s, or rather, not quite the 80s, but almost the 80s, the Xenomorph. And from the creepypasta era, we have, just get a photo of it right here. Open image. We have, oh, really? I'll just, okay, the Rake. So, how do we phrase this exactly? Let's start with the creature. The creature is essentially... why are these pictures all so small? Give me a decent-sized picture. Come on. There we go. That's good. That's a good photo. The creature from Black Lagoon, he is, well, a monster found in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. He's hidden from the world in an isolated location. But his motivations are fairly human. He finds someone he loves them. People go to his home. He wants to defend his territory. He's an animal, basically, with animal motivations, but they're also understandable. In a lot of ways, he's like King Kong. Sympathetic to a very strong extent. I'm going to cover SCPs. Yes, I'm going to cover SCPs. I'm going to get to SCPs in a bit, because that's a whole other discussion there, too. The cataloging of horror, which I think is very distinct in the internet era. Again, simple monster, lots of gills, lots of frills, lots of claws. Then we got the xenomorph. The xenomorph is, in many respects, let's go to the classic image right here. There's a good one. The xenomorph is, in many ways, the typical monster of the 80s. Purely unexplainable, purely alien, purely grotesque, and purely monstrous. We never learn in the movies until much later where these things come from or what they are. Just they are the perfect organism. Then, the rake. It's a monster. It's a monster. You find it. You're crazy. The fear about the rake actually was that it would chase you and be lurking into your room and your bed and just watch you. Again, very Michael Myers-esque. The staring, the stalking, the existing, but also the snatching and the animalistic tendencies of it. Possible cold take, Alien is just a nature attacks film, but in space. Yeah, that's fair. It's a haunted house film, essentially. Are you touching upon FNAF? Yes, I will, when I talk about the SCPs, because I feel like they come in the same kind of category. Because the thing about all this is, what made the rake interesting wasn't so much that it was a monster. It's that people wanted to find the explanation for it. The horror became people trying to find answers. The unexplainable draw to the rake led people to try to create their own narrative surrounding the rake. Whereas with the creature, there's a tragedy to the character. With the alien, it's an invasive, conceptually existential terror. I don't believe the terror surrounding the rake, or Jeff, or the Slender Man has anything to do with their inherent creepiness. It's the mystery. Because on the internet, anyone could indulge and explain the mystery, which led to what I feel is one of the worst things to have happened to horror. The obsessive cataloging and explanations and answerings of horror. Because you see, here's the thing. Michael Myers is far less scary the moment you know who he is. The moment you give Michael Myers a motivation, he becomes far less frightening. There you go. Go away. So, in Halloween 6, they explain that Michael Myers gets his powers of immortality and his scariness and his personality all comes from a cult. The cult of Thorn. They exist, they come, they give him some abilities, and that's that. And it's underwhelming. It's not that good. In fact, I'd say it's bad. That's underwhelming. I don't like that at all. I don't like that. That's how Michael Myers gets his thing. He's a very underwhelming, disappointing character, I'd say, when that happens. He's much scarier when you don't know what's going on. When you have no explanation as to why he is so evil. That is scary. That is frightening. Jeff the Killer was never particularly frightening. He has a scary face. That's about it. But the moment you would go to explain his history and you have this whole big tragic backstory, it removes all the fear surrounding him. Freddy Krueger, they explain his backstory. No one cares. It's not really effective to his character. No one cares. The Alien, they tried explaining its backstory, and they retconned it kind of, sort of, in the most recent Alien film. The Rake, scariest when an unexplainable monster, far less compelling when you explain him. The thing also about this era was that a lot of people tried to jump into the concept of the scary video game, the relationship between us and our media that we could consume. And I think a lot of people point to stuff like Ben Drowned, which is effective. And I did record something involving Ben Drowned, which will be coming to play a little bit later this month. But I think the best example of media that about the internet era of horror that explained our relationship to media was the Candle Cove story, which was ultimately adapted into the brilliant horror anthology Channel Zero. If you have not seen Channel Zero, you really should. It is incredible and consists of some of the most frightening. So, This is from Channel Zero, actually. This imagery right here. Channel Zero is one of the best horror TV shows to ever come out. Every season was a different creepypasta. It basically told the story of some kids who, on a message board, were reminiscing about some show they watched as kids. The more they tell it, the more unsettling the story becomes, until we find out at the end, when one of the kids, who's now grown up, talks to his mom about it, he learns that he was watching a channel tuned to static, staring at it for hours. As the comments are mentioning, Local 58 was also vaguely connected to Candle Cove in terms of a source of inspiration. A lot of analog horror, I think, draws from Candle Cove. The idea that there is this lost TV show, this lost station, this lost program that was forgotten about. And that through recontextualization, through revisiting it as an adult, we realized that there was some hidden, unsettling thing about something we just accepted as kids. Classic Luigi fan. Thank you for the super chat. Would it be possible to do a reading of Pale Luna? I think it really fits the reality/fiction mix you mentioned earlier. Yeah, we can do that. I'll be down for that. Should I read Pale Luna? Let me ask the chat. Should I read Pale Luna? Let's cast chat. Chat, what do you think? Should I read this? Sounds like a yes so far. 4 votes. Okay. All right. Seems to be a very interesting discussion so far. I might just read it if we get a few more votes in for it. And again, I think this is a non-traditional stream this week, but I will be doing more traditional stuff in the next couple of weeks and doing a video game stream next week at the very least when we finally get Budokai. I think it's next week that Sparkling Zero comes out. And again, I think it's also very telling that we have stuff like The Ring that came out around the same time. The Ring, of course, being the movie where you had the cursed videotape you put in the cassette. And, okay, looks like everyone wants me to do, looks like people want me to do the Pale Luna. Let's jump in. All right, let's dive right in. I'll put on the still frame right here of this still wallpaper right here. Yes, so I should also mention this right now. Tomorrow I will be jumping on Actual Fandom's Shillcast, his live stream. He asked me to join, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll hop on. It'd be fun. Don't hug me, I'm scared. And yeah, that's another example, too, of a great little scary story. So okay, I can bring this up. I'm going to keep this on here right now. So I'm going to just, okay, cool. Let's end poll. I'm going to read Pale Luna, as requested. In the last decade and a half, it's become infinitely easier to obtain exactly what you're looking for by way of a couple of keystrokes. The internet has made it all too simple to use a computer to change reality. An abundance of information is merely a search engine away, to the point where it's hard to imagine life as any different. Yet a generation ago, when the words streaming and torrent were meaningless save for conversations about water, people met face-to-face with conduct software swap parties. People met face-to-face to conduct software swap parties, trading games and applications on Sharpie-labeled 5.25-quarter-inch floppies. Of course, most of the time the meets were a way for frugal, community-minded individuals to trade popular games like King's Quest or Maniac Mansion amongst themselves. However, a few early programming talents designed their own computer games to share amongst their circle of acquaintances, who in turn would pass them on until, if fun and well-designed enough, an independently developed game had its place in the collection of aficionados across the country. Think of it as the 80s equivalent of a viral computer. Pale Luna, on the other hand, was never circulated outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. All known copies have long been disposed of. All computers that have ever run the game, now detritus, buried under layers of filth and polystyrene. This fact is attributed to a number of rather obtruse design choices made by its programmer. Pale Luna was a text adventure in the vein of Zark and the Lurking Horror, at a time when said genre was swiftly going out of fashion. Upon booting up the program, the player was presented with an almost completely blank screen, except for the text. You are in a dark room. Moonlight shines through the window. There is gold in the corner, along with a shovel and a rope. There is a door to the east. Command. So began the game that one writer for a long out-of-print fanzine described as an enigmatic, nonsensical, and completely unplayable. As the only commands that the game would accept were pick up gold, pick up shovel, pick up rope, open door, and go east. The player was soon presented with the following. Reap your reward. Pale Luna smiles at you. You are in a forest. There are paths to the north, west, and east. Command. What quickly infuriated the few who played the game was the confusing and buggy nature of the second screen onward. Only one of the directional decisions would be the correct one. For example, on this occasion, a command to go in a direction other than north would lead to the game freezing, requiring the operator to hard reboot the entire computer. Furthermore, any subsequent screens seemed to merely repeat the same text, with the difference only being the directions available. Worse still, the standard text adventure commands appeared to be useless. The only accepted non-movement related prompts were use gold, which caused the game to display the message, not here. Use shovel, which brought up, not now. And use rope, which prompted the text, you've already used this. Most who played the game progressed only a couple of screens into it before becoming fed up with having to constantly reboot the devices and tossing the disc in disgust, writing off the experience as a shoddily programmed farce. However, there is one thing about the world of computers that remains true. No matter the era, some people who use them have way too much time on their hands. Case in point, us. A young man by the name of Michael Nevins decided to see if there was more to Pale Luna than what met the eye. 5 hours and 33 screens worth of trial and error and unplugged computer cords later, he finally managed to make the game display different text. The text in this new area read, Pale Luna smiles wide. There are no paths. Pale Luna smiles wide. The ground is soft. Pale Luna smiles wide. Here. Command. It was another hour before Nevin stumbled upon the proper combination of phrases to make the game progress any further. Dig hole. Drop gold. Then fill hole. This caused the screen to display. Congratulations. 40.2428. Negative 121.4434. Upon which the game ceased to accept commands, requiring the user to reboot one last time. After some deliberation, Nevins came to the conclusion that the numbers referred to the lines of latitude and longitude. The coordinates led to a point in the sprawling forest that dominated the nearby Lazen Volcanic Park. As he possessed much more free time than sense, Nevins vowed to see Pale Luna through to its ending. The next day, armed with a map, a compass, and a shovel, he navigated the park's trails, noting with amusement how each turn he made corresponded roughly to those he took in-game. Though he initially regretted bringing the cumbersome digging tool on a mere hunch, the path's similarity all but confirmed his suspicions that the journey would end with him face-to-face with Necentric's buried treasure. Out of breath after a tricky struggle to the coordinates, he was pleasantly surprised by a literal stumble upon a patch of uneven dirt. Shoveling as excitedly as he was, it would be an understatement to say that he was taken aback when his heavy strokes unearthed the badly decomposing head of a blonde-haired little girl. Nevins promptly reported the situation to the authorities. The girl he identified was Karen Paulson, 11, reported as missing to the San Diego Police Department a year and a half prior. Efforts were made to track down the programmer of Pale Luna, but the nearly anonymous legal gray area in which the software swapping community operated inescapably led to many dead ends. Collectors have been known to offer upwards of 6 figures for an authentic copy of the game. The rest of Karen's body was never found. Quite the story, huh? So, Tiny Mushroom, thank you for the super chat. New fan, glad to catch a live. Perfect for spooky banking. Keep up the great work. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining up. So yeah, that's Pale Luna. Again, blurring the line between reality and fiction. But more so than just like other stories, it also connects to this idea that we have a different relationship with the fiction that we consume than we might otherwise have. It blurs the line between reality and storytelling. Because in this postmodern era of media, storytelling became the avenue. Yes, we all know the camp stories, right? My best friend's brother told me that this happened years ago, and he swears it was true, that someone, maybe the guy named Cropsy, maybe a guy named Jason, attacked campers at this summer camp years ago and was never found. He's still in the woods somewhere, but that remains to be seen if it was true or not. Hispanic Panic. What about the park ranger horror stories on Reddit? Those blur reality and fantasy pretty well, I feel. Yeah, thank you for the super chat, Hispanic Panic. Yeah, you're correct. They do. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, they're stories that were written as accounts, and they seem fairly real at first. Like park rangers sharing, here's some stories about when people who went missing in the park. We went and looked for them. I honestly, not gonna lie, I thought it was real too for a while. I thought, honestly, it was a very real story at first. Thinking, it's just park rangers, until you got to the ladders. Not ladders, the steps. Because the stories are progressing as normal, the park rangers are sharing their narratives, but they keep saying, you will encounter ladders if you're a park ranger. Do not touch the ladders. Do not approach the ladders. Keep walking past the ladders. And the stories, as they go on, delve into the question, what's on the ladder? I was just on the staircase. Why are these staircases in the middle of the woods? And the horrors become this idea of a cosmic underlying terror that lurks behind the woods, within the woods, that is somehow influencing the various stories of these park rangers. Yeah, they seem real until you get to the steps. Once you get to the steps, you're like, okay, this is fantasy. But then there's a hint of it that it goes back to acting as though it's real, and everyone's kind of role-playing along with it. So you kind of go, wait, is it real or is it fake? The further, though, the stories go, the more the steps are described and detailed. And they're never quite as scary as when you first jump into it. Now, what's interesting, too, is that a lot of these draw from a previously explained source. It all comes back to the Blair Witch Project, which had one of the greatest marketing attempts. Let me see if the site's even still alive. Is it still live? Is it still live? That's an. Hang on. Is this it? Did I find it? Is this it? Did I find the site? Oh no, I can't find it. It's broken. Dead link. I thought I found the original. Yeah, no, I was looking for the original Blair Witch Project site. Um, doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But the Blair Witch website was a viral website that contained pieces of news media, pieces of information about the Blair Witch. There was a documentary on the Sci-Fi Channel that supposedly told the true story of the Blair Witch. Supposedly. But, as with all things, reality is not as interesting as the fiction. Which website? There was no Blair Witch, for better or worse. But there was a movie where you went through the woods and it felt real. Right down to the boring experience of sometimes walking through the woods and seeing nothing. I'm not a fan of the Blair Witch, but I do respect what it tried to do. Quite a lot. The Wayback Machine. Yeah, that could work. That could work. History. Let's try this out. The Wayback Machine. Let's take a look. Ooh, where do I go? How far back to go? Oh, no, that's unfortunate. Wait. Ah, here we go. Welcome to a piece of internet history right here. That's not right. This is internet history in the making. Classic Luigi fan. What are you talking about, Ant? The link has never worked. There's never been a website. I think you're losing it. You might need help. That's possible, but then so do you, because we're right here. This right here is a case of internet history for you. The township of Blair was located in north central Maryland, 2 hours from Washington, D.C. Several children accuse Ellie Kedward of luring them into her home to draw blood from them. Kedward is found guilty of witchcraft, banished from the village during a particularly harsh winter, and presumed dead. This is in February 1785. November 1786. By midwinter, all of Kedward's accusers, along with half of the town's children, vanish. Fearing a curse, the townspeople flee Blair and vow never to utter Ellie Kedward's name again. November 1809. The Blair Witch Cult is published. This rare book, commonly considered fiction, tells of an entire town cursed by an outcast witch. 1824. Burkittsville is founded on the Blair site. August 1825, 11 witnesses testify to seeing a pale woman's hand reach up and pull 10-year-old Eileen Treckle into Tappy East Creek. Her body is never recovered, and for 13 days after drowning, the creek is clogged with oily bundles of sticks. March 1886. 8-year-old Robin Weaver is reported missing, and search parties are dispatched. Although Weaver returns, one of the search parties does not. Their bodies are found weeks later at Coffin Rock, tied together at the arms and legs, and completely disemboweled. November 1940 to May 1941. Starting with Emily Hollins, a total of 7 children are abducted from the area outside Burkittsville, Maryland. May 25th, 1941. An old hermit named Rustin Parr walks into a local market and tells the people there he is finally finished. After police hike for 4 hours to his secluded house in the woods, they find the bodies of 7 missing children in the cellar. Each child has been ritualistically murdered and disemboweled. Parr admits to everything in detail, telling authorities they did it for an old woman ghost who occupied the woods near his house. He is quickly convicted and hanged. October 20th, 1994. Montgomery College students Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams arrive in Burkittsville to interview the locals about the legend of Blair Witch for a class project. Heather interviews Mary Bloom, an old and quite insane woman who has lived in the area all her life. Mary claims to have seen the Blair Witch one day near Tappy Creek in the form of a hairy, half-human, half-animal beast. October 21st, 1994. In the early morning, Heather interviews two fishermen who tell the filmmakers that Coffin Rock is less than 20 minutes from town and easily accessible by an old logging trail. The filmmakers hike into Black Hills Forest shortly thereafter and are never seen again. October 25th, 1994, the first APB is issued. Josh's car is found later today, parked on the Black Rock Road. October 26, 1994, the Maryland State Police launched their search into the Black Hills area, an operation that lasts 10 days and includes up to 100 men, aided by dogs, helicopters, and even a flyover by the Department of Defense satellite. November 5th, 1994. The search is called off after 33 man-hours failed to find 33,000 man-hours failed to find a trace of the filmmakers or any of their gear. Heather's mother, Angie Donahue, begins an exhaustive personal search for her daughter and her two companions. And then, finally, they find a duffel bag a year later, roughly. So, again, that's the story of the Blair Witch, written much like the Creepypastas, written much like the case of Monsieur Valdemar. It's all the same structure and attempt to blur the lines between reality and fiction. But with the internet, we got a sense of imagery, of continuity, photos taken to further validate what we have. This is horror cinema history we're looking at right here. This beautiful marketing attempt to promote this film was widely successful. It completely blurred the line between fiction and reality in a way that had never been done before. And every single attempt at a creepypasta since has tried that. But with the enigmatic blurring of reality, there comes the problem with a lot of these stories. The cataloging of information, the over-obsessive cataloging of ideas, which leads to what may be one of the coolest or worst ideas in the internet history. The SCP Foundation. A concept that has since ruined so many horror concepts like the back rooms. Obsessive cataloging. Because the more you explain horror, the less frightening it becomes. The SCP Wiki, the SCP Foundation. A great work of intense cataloging. But I'd argue one of the worst things that have ever happened in horror. Because the more you explain it, the more boring it gets. Sure, the fingers of God. You have catalogs as to how dangerous they are. The omnipresence. Expression of knowledge. Let's take a look at this again. SCP-2070. Object class, Keter. Special containment procedures. Due to their apparent omnipresence, containment of SCP-2071 and 2072 is focused on suppression of knowledge. Disinformation campaigns intended to discredit and or totally drown out anyone who reports discoveries of these SCPs are to be maintained at all times. These campaigns consist of two components: a barrage of variously plausible but false claims, extensive debate regarding these claims, which tends to expose the claimants as frauds. Again, same concept, same idea. So, SCP-2070 is the collective designation for several anomalies related to the modern observational cosmology. The first is the observed tendency of the distribution of galaxies in the universe to be elongated and pointed towards our position on Earth. This tendency manifests itself as extended lines of galaxies resembling arrows. SCP-2070-1 instances are known in the astronomical community as fingers of God. Public discussion of SCP-2070-1 is to explain them as an effect of galaxies' velocities on observed redshifts on cosmological scales. SCP-2070-2 is the observed formation of galaxies into coherent, recognizable pictographs and symbols. Examples of these SCP's instances include a stick figure representation of a human being, its miniature depiction of the Sun and its 8 planets, as well as several of the larger Jupiter belt objects and 2 as of yet unobserved bodies. In 3 instances, characters consistent with Shang Dynasty era Oracle bone script. Rough translations of the messages include: "We are kings, we are special, we are the center." Again, this is all just the same thing we've seen before. More of the same, reiterated. The SCP Foundation is cool for a concept like X-Files, but I don't like it as a mythology with a cosmology that explains everything. It just feels too weak. I don't know. I don't like it too much. And I feel like it ruins concepts like the backrooms, which are very unsettling. The idea of this empty expanse that goes on and on forever, ruined by theorizing. And I feel a lot of this theorizing has to do with how FNAF took such a popular position. FNAF's popularity, I think, is in many ways indicative of the bigger issue with this modern era of horror: the obsessive cataloging. It's scariest when it first materializes, in my opinion. But I feel like that's enough of me talking right now. I've already read a couple stories, and I'm kind of wearing myself out today. This is a bit of a low-energy stream, I have to admit, but the internet, I think, has kind of done a lot of harm to horror. But they are bright spots. The analog horror community has really known that less is more. And unlike the more modern iterations, stuff like Poe and Lovecraft, you see more of. This more blurring of the reality, where less is more, where the unknowable becomes the fear, rather than the categorization of these things that are frightening. Rather than learn more and understand more, we are able to go a step away from it. To go, hey, what's going on? Anyway, I admit this was going to be a short stream today. I'm a little worn out. It's been a long couple of weeks. I have a lot of projects coming up in October, the first of which has just been uploaded on my channel. It is not public for anyone to see. Oh, Classic Luigi fan, thank you for the super chat. While the execution is debatable, the one thing SCP's got right was how it encouraged people to add their own lore and contribute to the story. Yes, I agree with that. The great thing about the SCPs and internet horror at large is that it encourages people to jump in and create their own narratives. And I'm always encouraging creativity. I do think want to recommend people avoid maybe over-explaining their horror. Sometimes less is certainly more, as we saw with Pale Luna. But I think in general the best approach is to open the door to more. Now, if you're sticking around, tomorrow I'll be jumping on the Shillcast podcast with actual fandom. I'll include a link to it in the on my community tab on my channel when I drop over there. But if you want to take a look at actual fandom's account, you can. Let me bring up a window to show you who he is. Yeah, sorry. I am talking too much and my throat is going. So that's why I'm stopping now. In fact, here we go. Here is my post. This is where we are. This is where we're going to be. Tomorrow it will be starting around... What time is it starting? I'll be a little late to it because I have my day job. It's supposed to start at 4:05 p.m. I will be late. But I will also be sharing it early. And who knows? I hope it's a good experience. I've never done this before with actual fandom, so I know that he's collaborated with Pillar of Garbage, who I have the great pleasure of saying helped me a lot when I first started and has been nothing but supportive of my channel since then. So I'm hoping it's a good occasion. But yeah, no, for the most part, that's all we got for today. A short stream, I know. Brad Fay, I am less familiar with, and I'm worried how we overshadow. I think I'm out of my league with Brad Fay there. I don't know, but anyway. But yeah, no, I'm sure it'll be fun. It'll be probably a fun experience. But I've never done that before with actual fandom, so here's hoping it's good. But that being said, this Friday is the werewolf video. I would like to show you more of the werewolf video right now, but unfortunately the thumbnail is not ready yet. I hope it'll be ready by Friday, because if not, that'd be really not great. But anyway, so that's that for right now. Thank you so much. I know it's going to be a short stream today, but unfortunately my throat is giving out on me as I keep talking, and it's been a very long day and I'm tired. So, look forward to everything coming up soon. More's on the way. October is a great big month for us, and we're hopefully going to do a lot of stuff. So, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.